Funding for Current Conversations is provided by the University of Oklahoma President's Office, OU Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Today, we are on location at the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Fort Worth, Texas. We'll be talking about race and indigenous culture with our special guest, Sedelta Oosahwee, a former senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Agriculture and now a policy analyst with Tribal Tech. She works with issues relating to rural development, food, and nutrition. Stay with us and meet this important public policy consultant. Sedelta Oosahwee, welcome to Current Conversations. It is great to have you here. You've had just a really interesting career in public service with federal government, and now I think you're with an organization called Tribal Tech. Could you walk us through, maybe start with your tribal identification, talk about that a little bit if you wouldn't mind, and then maybe a few things about your career?
Okay, so I grew up in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. I'm an enrolled citizen of the 3 affiliated tribes there in Fort Berthold, North Dakota. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had a really unique upbringing. My mom grew up in this reservation community in North Dakota. My dad is a Cherokee speaker that grew up in Tahlequah, kind of rural Oklahoma. So I had these two perspectives of like what it meant to be Native and Indigenous, and I really appreciated that. And that really kind of helped shape and form who I am today. I went to the University of Oklahoma for undergrad and then graduate school. I know. I loved it so much I went on to graduate school there. And so after that, I ended up in education, which is something I never wanted to do. My mom was kind of an educator. My dad, everyone in my family, I felt like were educators. So I was like, I want to do something different. I want to make my own path. And I ended up in a graduate program in education and working at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah. And I realized that I love education. I mean, I guess it's probably in your blood. I think it's one of those things where my family, there's a reason we're all drawn to this because I think it's just something that we enjoy and we're good at. And so I was there for a few years, but I kind of recognized that I wanted to do a little bit more for my community and my students and started reaching out. I ended up being invited to a position in DC. Somebody called me out of the blue and said, hey, we need somebody to be a legislative assistant at this firm that we own. Are you interested? I went ahead and did an interview and they offered me the position, and I'd never really thought about living in DC. I was very content in Oklahoma. I thought I'd be like my mom and dad, you know, I'll work at the university, have a family, and that's what you do in life. And
it's got to be culture shock going to a place like DC.
It was absolute culture shock. I'm not even, that first night I got there, I just finished my first day of work and I got to my room and I was like, what have I done? And I think I probably cried that night because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here.
People talk about the pressure cooker atmosphere there.
Yeah, definitely. And just not knowing anyone, not knowing my bearings. But when I was offered the position, I knew I had to take it because it was a very unique once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I think that's kind of been my story of these opportunities that presented themselves. And I've just had to say yes to them, you know, and if I hadn't said yes to one of those, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now.
So this was a corporation initially?
It was a lobbying firm. They lobbied on behalf of tribes. And so that was a really interesting environment too, just to learn about how that works and what it looks like and how complicated it is.
Did that give you the connections that led you to be in the U.S. Department of Agriculture?
It did. So it did. I actually met so many people in that year. There's a small tribal community there, a really good, close-knit community. I was in D.C. for a year, and I actually moved back to Oklahoma to work for the tribe. They were during this transition, and I came back during that time. But about 6 months in, I kind of realized I missed D.C., and I felt like I had left a little too early, which is weird because I missed home when I was in D.C.
Total transformation where you missed it, yeah.
Yeah, I think I kind of romanticized home to a certain degree. I love Oklahoma. My family's there, and I'll always come back. But I felt like I needed to do a little bit more, and I had the tools to do more. So I reached out to the people I met that first time and said, hey, I'm interested. Do you see anything? And my first position was actually with the White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaska Native Education. I was appointed the associate director there. So a friend recommended me to the director at the time, and he reached out and said, can you send us your resume? We can't make any promises, but we're trying to fill this position, and we're seeking seeking out people. So I sent it in not knowing what would happen, and I had a phone interview, face-to-face interview, and then I was offered the position.
Was that complicated with your background to do that? Because just so often, Indigenous people talk about feeling, I don't know, maybe at odds with the federal government.
Right.
And so here you were, an insider suddenly. I mean, what was that like?
You know, people have asked me that over the past, especially with the Dakota Access Pipeline and the things that were happening over the last, year. How do you kind of, I guess, reconcile the two? But what I've come to realize and understand is that I was working from within the system to create change, which is one of the most complicated and sometimes physically and emotionally trying things you can do. I had no idea how complicated the system was, these feelings of isolation, but I also recognized that we weren't present in so many times and places. That system wasn't created or designed for or by us, and so our perspectives weren't incorporated into so many things, and we were kind of afterthoughts. And so it was a matter of like learning all of these different things and how do we make it more how do we make it better for tribes and for our communities and have better representation?
Did this hurt you back home? I mean, were people judgmental that you were in a job like that? I mean, you've got, you're explaining the rationale for what you're trying to do, but I can imagine that wasn't always translatable to folks back home. Was that hard?
I think most of them were actually really proud and really happy for me because, the administration, the Obama administration was incredible for tribes. And, I think there's all of these little things that happen that most people don't know about and we may not recognize, for years to come. And one thing that I think is really powerful is that he included us in the conversation. He mentioned us in his speeches. He had positions created for us. And I talked to a lot of young people during that time, and I wanted them to know, I said, you have to understand that this is unique. When I was growing up, the president never said tribes, didn't talk to us, didn't come to our communities. We were invisible. And the fact that you have someone in this position who's acknowledging you, going to your communities, asking you to come in to see him is amazing. And now you know what that feels like. But you also have to understand that that can go away. That it's as quickly as it comes, it can go away. And so we have to always make sure that we're voting for people and looking for people who do that. But I think what's really interesting is that they're going to grow up in a world where that's normal and okay. I think of Wilma Mankiller, and one of the things that was most incredible to me was that she allowed me to grow up in a time thinking it was normal for a woman to be chief. Because when I was a child, she was chief. And I was like, oh, women are chief. That's what happens. And I think for our community, we're like, oh yeah, you can be a black man and be president. That's normal. Yeah. And that's really empowering for them. So I really look forward to see what all of these young people who interacted with him or Michelle or other people in administration, what they go on to do.
So that was a good time for you, right? And you felt that you were advancing the good, the tribal good.
Yeah, it was a golden age for me.
So you, in a word, were a victim of political transformation, new administration.
Right.
So tribal tech, what's that?
So Tribal Tech, we have different contracts with different government agencies. So we have a contract with the Office of Indian Ed to help administer some of their programs and outreach. We have one with the Office of Energy at Department of Energy, and they have two with Health and Human Services. One is with ANA, the Administration for Native Americans, and the other one is with SAMHSA, Substance Abuse, Health. I can't remember all of it. I apologize for that, but SAMHSA, it's kind of a new agency for me to be working with. But I contract and help with the SAMHSA contract that they have. And so they have this thing called the Tribal Technical Advisory Center. And so tribes call in, and if they have problems or issues, we have someone that does an inventory and walks them through it, and we provide training for them. So one of the things that we provide is this training called Gathering of Native Americans, which is this incredible training module talking about historical trauma and trauma-informed care and healing. And so I'm going to get to go and participate in my first go into training in I guess in July. And so I'm really excited about that. Everyone that I've known who's gone through it has nothing but praise for it. And so it's really cool to learn about this agency that's doing so much for our tribes and communities that maybe people don't know about. And to hear them say stuff like trauma-informed care and historical trauma and how do we address that. And those aren't words and concepts that you usually hear from the federal government.
Historical trauma, people are talking about that more, and that just seems like
and
such an important...
And they're supporting that, and they actually actively support that work.
You just show so much strength and flexibility and everything that you do, and so often to be ignored by the culture at large can be soul crushing. Was there an experience that happened to you as a child where you saw, well, I could do work like this, I could make a difference? Was there a role model? Maybe it was Wilma Mankiller. Where did you draw the strength from?
I think I just drew from my family, my grandparents. They were just incredibly strong, resilient human beings. I mean, they're just incredible people. And that strength, I think, has kind of carried me through in different places and areas. They all overcame so much. You know, my dad was one of 8. My mom was one of 11. My mom was in boarding school. My dad had to learn English when he went to the public school system. And so they all overcame so much. And my parents both went on to get college degrees. And so that was an expectation that was set for us. As a kid, I just assumed you go to high school, then you go to college, and then you get a job and you're done. And that was an incredible expectation set by my parents and my family. But their strength and everything that they've overcome, I think, just kind of carried me through. And it's been one of the greatest gifts that they've ever given me.
You are somebody that works under, I would say, the umbrella of social justice in a very important way. And to be somebody so clear-minded and strong as you are, you have to work some of those things out so that you know what your own version of social justice is, what you're working toward. Would you share that with us? I mean, how do you think of social justice in relation to tribal world?
Well, I think that, social justice has become this kind of buzzword and a hashtag, and I'm not sure if everyone really is on the same page as to think of, what is social justice? Like, what does it actually mean?
Define it.
People really don't define it. I think that I kind of have to laugh because I was thinking, I think James Brown kind of said, I don't want you to give me nothing, open the door and I'll get it myself. And the way I feel about social justice is like this recognition that doors are closed to people and how do we open them, and let's open those doors. For tribal communities, we haven't had access to so many things, and our voice hasn't been at the table or part of the conversation for so long. So it's a matter of being at the table and trying to be a reflection of that. But a lot of the work was educating people and reminding them tribes still exist, we're still here, we're different than other communities, and here's how, and you need to work with us differently. But the fact that we were there and able to communicate that and tell people that was so powerful. And it opened doors for people and communities.
The question I'm going to ask now could be a whole other show, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
We could think about sort of the dual original sins of the United States as slavery and Indian removal.
Right.
And it feels like maybe we get a little closer dealing with historical trauma, with slavery. The culture it doesn't seem to be very close to dealing with indigenous issues, and they need to be dealt with. Why? I mean, there's never been a indigenous Supreme Court justice, for example. You can just go on with that list way down the list. Why aren't we closer on that? It would just seem like to be a no-brainer. We need to talk about our past.
It's true. I think it's because we're just invisible. Part of it is the statistics. We're such a small percentage of the population, and most people never have interactions with other tribal people. A lot of the times it's only through a mascot or some other kind of demeaning way that they have any kind of context point for Native people. We were at this screening last night, More Than a Word. It's an incredible documentary, and there was a Q&A after, and one of the people said, I just didn't know this was an issue. And my friend looked at me, she said, how do they not know this is an issue? And I told her, I was like, because we live in a different universe. As a kid, I thought everyone was Native American. I thought everyone was Indian because I grew up in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Everyone in Tahlequah is Indian. They're all Cherokee. When I went up to North Dakota, I would pick up my aunt in Nebraska and my cousin, and they're Indian. And I have people in Minneapolis and Montana, all over. We had family, and they're all Indian. So I just assumed we're all Indian, And I remember as a kid, I was looking at a history book one summer because I was a nerd and I read all the time. And I was like, oh, population, it says we're less than 1%. That must be a typo. So I walked up to my mom. I was like, Mom, it says 1%. And she was like, my mom doesn't know either. Like, she's wrong on this too, which is crazy. It wasn't until I left that I realized that bubble that I lived in, and I think we have the social media bubble now because all of my friends are very active and they have all these issues. They're always coming up on my timeline, on my feed. But if you don't have anyone in your life that has that perspective, you don't see that story.
I think you're talking about something very simple but very powerful, that there are millions of Americans. I'm going to say this, but I think it's true, who've either never met a black person or never really known a black person and possibly never met an indigenous person. Millions. And that is a problem,
That's a huge problem.
Right there.
That's one of the biggest problems I see. And I kind of ask people, like, if you don't understand this Black Lives Matter, if you have no one in your life who truly and honestly fears when they send their child out out the door of what could happen to them. If you don't know anyone in their life who is honestly afraid of interactions with police officers because of the outcomes of so many, if you have no one in your life that has that perspective, that's a privilege, and that's something you might want to consider. Just walking across, but we're segregated in so many ways, whether it's through religion, through area code, through neighborhood, through schools, which are a huge problem. You can live your whole life and never have to have that interaction or that close personal friendship to where you can understand that perspective.
From a rational perspective, it's hard to ask people to care about what they don't know about.
I think it's exposure.
Just for starters.
Yeah, it's exposure. Expose yourself and talk to other people. Just have a conversation. Because if you don't know, you don't know. I mean, if you never had that, but if you're exposed to it, it's like, I've given you this information now. And what are you going to do with that? Do you sit with it, or do you try to do something different? And it might not be something that happens right away, but maybe a couple weeks down the line, maybe you're like, so-and-so said this to me, and I'm thinking about it more, and now I want to know more. But if you've never had to be exposed to it, I can totally understand how that happens.
A lot of people who are involved in social activism, social equity in one way or another, talk about maybe a period about a decade ago where it felt like some of these goals that were worth attaining were just within reach. And a lot of those folks feel that really in the last decade that the goals seem maybe they've slipped further away. Something's happened. Do you subscribe to that? I mean, are we in a dark age in terms of social equity?
I don't think we're in a dark age. I think we're in an age where we're seeing more of some of these issues coming to the forefront. We were able to, I think, kind of hide them, and this election has been so divisive. So many things are coming up that we thought had either been dealt with or aren't understanding. So I think it's been something that's been brought to the surface more so. I don't want to believe in a dark point, because I just have to feel like there's hope and that we're moving forward and something good can come of it. So, I don't know, but I was listening to, I actually had the opportunity to hear Coates speak at, Between the World and Me. I was at a session and he was speaking in DC, but, they mentioned all of these issues that we're facing. These are generations of slavery that we're trying to fight against, generations of genocide and policies of assimilation toward tribal people. It's not going to change overnight. And it's not going to be one person. It's not going to be one idea. There's no silver bullet to fix everything. Like, there's not one thing that'll make it all better, because there's so many pieces of this puzzle that have to be fixed and changed on every layer. So I think understanding that and knowing that change is going to take a long time, it will be generations before we can kind of get to a different place, kind of helped ground me and give me some sanity. Like, you don't have to change it all. You don't have to fix it. It's not all on you. Because I was feeling at that time like, I'm not doing enough. I can't do it all. And just losing sleep and, what am I going to do? There's nothing I can do right now. But knowing that it's going to take time and I can't do it all was really kind of allowed myself to rest and give myself some reprieve, I guess, from the pressures I was feeling.
But let me ask you just a very practical question. I mean, given how obvious it is that racial inequity is a major problem in the United States, why isn't there more national conversation, productive national conversation, where we're at least chipping away at some of these issues and making some kind of progress? Or maybe you're seeing conversations that I'm not aware of.
I think a lot of it, education. We're not exposed to this. It's not something we don't get taught a proper history. So we assume that we know this, the creation story. It's almost a myth of America and how it was created. They came over, they were persecuted, they created this democracy here. Every man created equal. And it's this really beautiful story. And George Washington was this great person, Abraham Lincoln, but there's all of these other dynamics, these men that we don't talk about when we talk about history. And so we're not learning the real history of this country.
Maybe the play Hamilton, just a little bit, does open up some of that, just because these aren't demigods, these are flawed people.
They're actual human beings who are flawed, but we've kind of created them into these deities of almost to a degree of like, they're larger than life, mythical human beings and all good. And they're not. They're like any human being. They had good, they had bad, they had flaws. And they were working under pretenses that we don't have anymore. But I think education's a key piece of it. But I think that the discussion of race and racism is a moral discussion that we frame it in that way, and it's not. Good people can't be racist, and if you're bad, you are, and it's a good or bad thing, and it's not. It's this whole institutional, systemic thing happening, and we don't talk about it in those ways.
Is the issue maybe of white privilege and just white unawareness of white privilege an issue? Because I can remember moments in the Obama administration where the president, who was, very sophisticated person and really aware of a lot of things going on in the culture, and you could see him sort of tiptoe up to something and kind of back off because he knew there weren't hearers for what he needed to say. Is that or just a lot of conversations that don't happen because we're all afraid of the sensibilities of white people that don't want the finger pointed at them?
Yeah. I think that is a big part of it. And I think the word privilege throws a lot of people off, because I think the way we frame it and the way they think of privilege is kind of in this monetary, financial. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. I don't have any privilege. And that's not really what we're talking about. And so when they hear that, they shut off and they don't want to hear anything else, or the conversation stops or becomes confrontational. I also think that there's a fear of blame. You know, this isn't a blame game. This isn't you did this or you did that. It's like, how do we start talking about these deeper issues and get to a place of better understanding?
That's a tough one. I've seen that come up a lot, where people will say, well, I don't want to be made to feel guilty. I don't want to feel bad.
And or I didn't do it. It was that's so long ago, and it's not me.
And somebody needs to just say, well, it's not about you, but it's our common history. We need to talk about that. Yeah.
And I think, you know, I actually have spoken to different student groups over the last year, and the first part of it is this history piece of, like, these are some of the major themes of and eras of tribal policy with the United States government. Here's this assimilation piece, here's a reservation time. And I know the kids are probably like, why are we talking about this? But I said, I need you to understand this so we can understand where we're at today. So in the work I did, I worked with 567 tribes. This is the demographics of the community I work with. We have people who live in LA and New York, Chicago.
Was this when you were with the USDA, or which period?
This was, part of it was during the USDA, part of it was earlier this year when I was taking some time off. But it was just understanding we're in these cities because of the relocation period. We have these school systems called the BIE school under this system, and just trying to have them understand all the systems at play and how history brought us to this point in time, so to connect them to that. I grew up in Oklahoma because of the relocation and because of the Removal Act. That directly impacted me and my family. You, as people living here in New York, you came here and your family has their own story of how they got here. You have your own policies, whether they're things that happen in other parts of the world or here in the United States that brought you to this place in time, and you have to understand that. I also wanted them to know that we look at history in numbers, and it's really easy to not, like on the Trail of Tears, 4,000 Cherokees died. It's just a number to them, but it's like when you start thinking that was 4,000 individual people, that was a mother, a father, that was a child, an auntie, and there's all of these. They all were individual people, part of it. That's devastating. And we just think of it in this, that was so long ago and now's now, but it all connects to where we're at now.
You make such a good point about change is going to really be at many different levels and many parts of the culture, et cetera. This would just seem to be a situation that so obviously calls out for national leadership. Somebody to lead the way and model it and open up those conversations and be encouraging to people that they can survive those conversations. It's not going to devastate them. We can learn about our history. I'm not even sure what the question is here. Why don't we have those leaders? Where could they come from? Where would you think they might come from? We just seem to need that leadership so much.
We do, and I'm not really, that answer is one that I'm not really sure about either. I mean, there's so many, I don't know if it's a coalition of people. I don't know if it needs to be more grassroots. It's nice to have that national kind of person or place to look, but I don't really know. Maybe it's spaces like NCORE where we have these people. It might not just be one, but collectives of people that can do that.
The National Conference of Race and Ethnicity, where people come from all over the country and have these conversations.
They have these conversations in spaces that they're comfortable with, other people who are like-minded, and then they go out and try to spread that word to where they go. So maybe it's these places where we all come together and have time to have these conversations and refuel, because I think we need that, and that happens here. And then go out and try to teach other people and bring other people on board. So next year, bring more people with you so we can have more people going out having these conversations.
A lot of leaders at a lower level, not the big,
not just this one kind of person or these, because I think that's how we look at leadership and power anymore. Like, even with president, I think, there's this idea of like this one person holds all the power. And I think it needs to be a lot of people doing this work. And I don't think it can change without a lot of people doing
If you
the work.
were queen of the world for a day and could do whatever you wanted, what 2 or 3 changes would you make that you felt would really make a difference?
I think one would be getting rid of queens and kings. No more one person in charge of everything.
Good idea.
And I think two would be, I would love to see our history taught in a way that is more reflective of the true story, because I think that would help us maybe understand each other a little bit better. It's not going to change everything, but I think if we can at least be honest about where we've come from. And our history is not always beautiful. It's cruel sometimes. It's bloody. It's sad. There's so many things, and it's hard. It's painful. Our history is painful. And I think growth is painful. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why we have so many people who are afraid to have those conversations, because it means looking at things and seeing things differently. And any kind of growth, physical, emotional, spiritual, it hurts.
Yeah,
it's a very painful thing to do, and I don't think a lot of people really want to do that, especially if you're struggling just to get by. I'm worried about putting food on my table. I don't have time to think about anything else going on around me. So
right,
yeah.
But it would be liberating. I mean, it would bring us together as a community.
It would expose them to different ideas and understanding of, so that's why I have a better understanding of how these people are living here, and the cycle of poverty continues, because now I understand redlining, or I understand, the segregations of schools and what that means and what that looks like in the actual real life outcomes of that.
Would you look into your crystal ball? You're still queen, by the way. Look into your crystal ball about 10 years ahead, and tell us something that you think you personally believe is likely to happen that will have an impact on racial equity, maybe for tribal peoples in the United States, good or bad, but something on the horizon you think is kind of waiting out there for us.
I think what's happening is, with this last election, we have so many people who are saying, I want to run for office. I want to know more about this. I want to be representative. So I think we're going to see an influx of, different people from different backgrounds, women, Native people, tribal people, politicians who are from different communities coming forward and representing us and learning about this system that is so complicated to help improve the lives of their communities and others and everyone around them. So I think there's going to be an influx of that. I'm hopeful. I'm so hopeful it happens.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see why you'd say that, because there are periods in American history of awakenings where there was something that was really challenging to the culture. And in response to that, a lot of people have to define their values and kind of double down. And it sounds like you're saying that out of the current period, we're going to see some kind of renewal.
It was a reality check for so many, and they said, well, what am I doing and how can I do more? And I think they recognize that they're waiting for other people to come in. And I had to talk about an experience recently, and I was like, I think we keep waiting for someone to come in and save us and say, this is wrong and that's right. And you come to this realization that sometimes you have to save yourself. And so you have to be that person that steps forward and makes that decision to
you
run
may be
for
the
office.
only one who can save yourself.
Right. And then by doing so, you help other people along the way.
Sedelta Oosahwee, thank you so much for being on the show. You were wonderful. Thank you for taking the time for being here. That's all we have time for today. Please find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you so much for being a part of today's show. Join us next time for more Current Conversations.